my opinion, the biggest problem is sort of change management, right? Like you can build the best model ever, but convincing someone to use it in whatever venue that looks like, I find is incredibly difficult. And it also like leads me therefore to anybody that's like developing in this community, whatever part of AI you're part of, whether it's Gen AI, if you're data science, or if you're part of putting models in production, become a better communicator. Convincing others to use is a humongous skill.
Welcome to the Conversations on Applied AI podcast, where Justin Grammans and the team at Emerging Technologies North talk with experts in the fields of artificial intelligence and deep learning. In each episode, we cut through the hype and dive into how these technologies are being applied to real-world problems today. We hope that you find this episode educational and applicable to your industry, and connect with us to learn more about our organization at appliedai.mn. Enjoy.
Welcome, everyone, to the Conversations on Applied AI podcast. I'm your host, Justin Grammans, and our guest today is David Howard. David is a multidisciplinary data scientist and researcher with more than 6 years of industry experience and 8 years in academia. He's been focused on pioneering advancements in generative AI and driving decision-making through insightful analytics, predictive modeling, and advanced data interpretation. As a PhD and former professor in mathematics with research in computer algorithms, he specializes in harnessing complex mathematical theories and applying them in practical ways to solve real-world problems. Makes a lot of sense being on this podcast because we really love applications. He is currently leading technical advancements at Cox Auto with a robust team of 45 data scientists, where his current role involves educating and mentoring others on the utilization of large language models and generative AI. Always an educator, like myself, he hosts a bi-weekly seminar called Mundane to Masterful, educating more than 100 people as he demonstrates generative AI and its transformative potential across various industries. So thank you, David, so much for being on the Conversations on Applied AI podcast today.
Thank you so much. I think you did a better job than I could have myself on my previous background.
I've done this a couple times for sure. So
clearly.
Yeah. Well, awesome. So I told the audience here a little bit about sort of where you're at today, but I'm always curious, kind of what was your trajectory? What was your path as you sort of walked these little, steps along the way towards getting where you're at today?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I would say when you make a prediction, forecasting, even yourself, like there's going to be incorrect, inaccuracy is all the case. When I joined academia, like I thought that was my life for the rest of my life. And honestly, I love mathematics, right? I was in combinatorics, graph theory, and thinking that this mathematics problems that are out there, often esoteric and not the direction necessarily of this podcast, but I loved working on those type of problems. And then essentially around 2017, 2018, we realized as a family that we were going to have to move to Atlanta. And that basically necessitated a change, right? So if you know academia, unless you are the Andrew Ng of this world or the Jeffrey Hintons, like you don't get necessarily the choice based on a location. So I knew I had to make a career switch. Okay. Given my background in computer science from undergrad, and still even within research, I would occasionally use computer algorithms. It made a natural jump. And so I started learning in 2017 and haven't stopped ever since. And the thinking in terms of data science is very similar, I would argue, than mathematics. Like you're still working on mathematical problems. It's just that your tooling is a little bit different. Depending on what you want to do, right? You've got visualization tools, you've got algorithm tools. You could bring in knowledge from a particular subject matter space that you want, like become better Python coder. Apologies to the R users. I'm not the greatest R coder. I can read the code, but learning a better memory optimization, learning, there's totally an infinite supply. Like, as a data scientist, you wear many hats no matter what you're working at. And so your knowledge can suddenly branch off into all these different areas. And it's super important, I would say. I could spend my entire life just learning and not talking to anybody, and it could go on forever.
So yeah, as a professor of mathematics, you kind of are in this lane, right? There's just the one thing you're going to be teaching. And this whole data science world allows you a much more wide variety of tools.
I would say a wider variety, but there is plenty of opportunities, I think, to teaching. I taught various subjects. If you want to go down and talk about number theory right now, I am ready to have a lesson or two. In fact, it's like my go-to in terms of sometimes testing out generative AI. Like I like using primitive Pythagorean triples, which you've never heard of, but it's, you've heard of Pythagorean theorems and you've heard of 3, 4, 5 triangles in all likelihood. But the whole mathematics behind generating these is a topic that sort of can be done in intro number theory. But if you ask these various LLMs, up until GPT-4o, they weren't good. But GPT-4o does a fantastic job. In terms of the mathematics space, like I'm very impressed with that.
Yeah. My undergrad was in applied math and physics. So it's
Nice.
been a long time, but I did love the applications of math. And so per your point, like I didn't find it interesting, like classical math, like let's solve for X. Like I was like, no, I want to solve for X because I want to figure out how far I threw the baseball or how far the baseball is going to go based on this velocity, right? But, you're right. That's what got me into software engineering, and I got a master's in software. And I actually teach at a local university here. I teach in the master's program. So I got my foot sort of in both sides. But yeah, I've been thinking about like, just the traditional path, trying to get a PhD. And I've talked to the people that have gotten them. And it seems like it's a unique type of thing to do. Like it's a lot of work.
Agreed.
Obviously, I think you probably do it more because it's a passion that you want to go deep on a specific subject.
100%. Like do it because it's a passion. Like if you want to earn, quote, money, if that's your goal, like I would say there are faster paths.
Yeah.
But in terms of enjoyment, fulfillment, like, I loved doing my PhD.
Yeah. Well, good. So after you left academia, right, what was the first company you went to?
Delta Airlines. And I love that company. So just before the podcast, we were talking about how I was up at 3:00 this morning because I still have standby options even after leaving the company. But it was a great company to work for. I really enjoyed bringing ML models. I worked with a fantastic team. It was great. I really loved my years at Delta.
Nice.
And now Cox Auto, which I actually even love even more, my current role.
Well, tell us a little bit about that. So what is Cox Auto and what are you doing with all these data scientists there?
So quick thing of Cox Auto, I'm sure a large percent of people have not heard of Cox Automotive, but it is actually the biggest player in the automotive space. You probably likely have heard of companies like Auto Trader, Kelley Blue Book, maybe Mannheim. This is the companies that Cox Automotive owns. Their space largely in the infrastructure in cars. So they provide dealers with services. They handle transportation. They work in service and repair all over the place and stuff with EV batteries now. So lots of different things that they work on. And the company sort of internal model, but doesn't actually, it doesn't get published anywhere, is that when you hire, we worry about all the job description, but we also don't hire a jerk. I think it really shows into the company. I love everybody that I work with. I mean, we have arguments, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But it's a fantastic workplace to be in. I work with, like you talked about at the beginning, 50 or so, 45 or so data scientists. And then I work across the product. I talk with senior leadership. And my role is kind of the most senior technical person in the data science community. So I spend a lot of time, as you talked about, educating others, whether that's mentorship to junior colleagues, collaborating with other colleagues inside data science and also software engineering, model ops, learning from each other. I will advise senior leadership. So I'm in lots of different meetings saying, okay, we have this new product use case. From a technical standpoint, what do you see benefits of using certain algorithms? How difficult? Potential lift from a technical standpoint? And then my boss will also be in those meetings, and she is the most amazing boss and also very knowledgeable inside of AI and ML. And she has more of the business complete mindset in that regard. Like, okay, what resources do we have? Like, how well do we think it will be absorbed by various parts of the company, or if we're doing it external to dealers, things of that nature. And we work amazingly in tandem. So lots of things, and I'm constantly learning. So I get to complete autonomy from her. We meet once a week and I'll say, I'm going to work on this today because I think it's useful. And she goes, that's awesome. Also, these things are coming down the pipe. If you have any interest in those, it's a fantastic partnership we have.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Yeah. That can be hard to find sometimes. I've worked a lot of different jobs, so you're very lucky to
I am very lucky
in that environment. Now, so Cox Auto, how long have they been around?
So Cox Automotive specifically, I'm going to get this wrong, and I should know this, but I think it was Mannheim adoption. Oh man, was it 1980, maybe 75? But if I'm off by 50 years, apologies.
No, I think the crux of my question is there's probably been a lot of data science going on within this organization for a long period of time, right?
Yes and no. It's tough to say, right? Because my argument would be data science development. What did that look like over there? Previously there was a bunch of stuff in SAS and we were having statistical methods and distributions. And before that we had smaller data. So linear regression was still there. So I don't know how I would define when the moment data science started.
Yeah.
And also, I was going to say that Cox Automotive is actually part of a larger Cox Enterprises. So the Cox family, it's a privately owned company, and they have Cox Communications, which is a cable company, and they own stuff in other forms of media. So I think one of their first acquisitions was Dayton newspaper in Ohio. I think that's right. So they've been around for 100 years or so.
Yeah. So when it comes to automotive, then, so you guys are sitting on a lot of data, obviously, right? And
Yeah.
this is the story that someone wants to come in and, yeah. I mean, what, like, walk me through a typical use case, because eventually we're going to start talking about Gen AI, how Gen AI plays
Yeah.
into this. But before Gen AI, right, what is the typical use case?
I mean, it's tough. So, like, as I said at the very beginning, like Cox Automotive is a lots of different branches.
Yeah.
So, I'm on calls with various parts of the data science community. We have people working on a company inside that's called FleetNet America and Ready Logistics. And these are both working on optimization problems. So there's an exchange where dealers have to deliver cars to other dealerships or other locations. And then there's also the truck drivers or truck people that have to haul them, right? And you need to take loads and balance them with your resources. So this is a resource, scheduling optimization problem.
Yeah.
And that is housed inside of, right now, data science is working on it. But we're also working on auctions. So we have the biggest wholesale auction space. So like dealers selling to other dealers, they bring cars into these Mannheim auctions, which there are others, but it's the biggest player. And now we're talking about models that involve valuations. So like a lot of wholesale and is also in public sales valuation. So the Kelley Blue Book has been around for forever. And like there's a driving force that we're it's like circular logic, like we're building models for valuations, but at the same time, like then people are believing them. And so it's like a feedback loop. So there's all sorts of things. And this is just traditional ML space. We offer products within Mannheim that I was just on a call today about improving our Deal Shield product, which is basically insurance for the dealers when they go to buy a car. Like here is this fee that you pay. You can return it, no questions asked, but it works just like insurance. So there's a safety net, reduce the variance in terms of loss for the dealers.
Gotcha.
So, lots of them. And now we're working on the generative AI space, like you said, and I get a big hand in that because I'm helping lead the company in that regard.
That's awesome. And so these are situations where people need to generate text typically, like you say, using these large language models?
Generate text or absorb text. So right now, for generate text, I was working on a POC for call summarization. So we have various avenues where, it is a call center. You get transcripts. We'd like to get a call summary. So me and a colleague who is more on the software engineering and making it all happen, like I more on the theory and algorithm part of it, we generate an output for summarizing calls in a particular structure. And then we're going to work on accuracy for all the information as well as worrying about PII. There's other things that I'm working with. We have all these data sets, 10,000 or so data sets at Cox Auto that are, think of tabular column data sets, right? So standard row table. And they don't have generated descriptions. So part of I've written algorithms to basically digest the table, do some basic manipulations on the data and output a description. And so that's almost in complete flight. And that is going to be a big lift for infrastructure in the company. So just two, but we have other ones in flight and other people that are doing, and we're talking about how to best evaluate. And yeah, it's a very, as you know, a very exciting place to live in. Right
now. Well, what are some challenges you're seeing as you're working through some of these?
So what type of challenge? Are you talking about technical challenges? You're talking about people challenges?
Everything. Because a lot of companies, I talk to a lot of companies and they're like, I want to put some AI in my company. And I'm like, well, man, but we need to understand what the business, use case is. So there's a lot of...
So we're going to talk about this for the rest of the podcast. Okay. I feel like we could. So, I'll try to, sort of limit it a little bit. But in my opinion, actually, this stands, AI, not just generative AI, but my opinion, the biggest problem is sort of change management, right? Like you can build the best model ever, but convincing someone to use it in whatever venue that looks like, I find is incredibly difficult. And it also leads me therefore to anybody that's developing in this community, whatever part of AI you're part of, whether Gen AI, if you're data science, or if you're part of putting models in production, become a better communicator. Convincing others to use is a humongous skill. I need to work on it more, right? I wish I was a better communicator than I currently am. I think I do all right for the average bear, but I can always improve. And I can tell you the things that I do wrong when I'm communicating and things that I focus on but want to get better. So I'm going off tangent. That's one big challenge. And that's the biggest challenge I said. There's also fears, particularly in the Gen AI space. We're terrified of hallucinations, obviously.
Right.
For months, years now on end about when GPT screws up, And the amazing part is like humans screw up all the time. Right?
Mm.
Like, we're easy to forgive those. Like, oh, my buddy made this mistake. Oh, it's fine. You did that. It's not a big deal. But like, look at this model. I've seen this one error. Oh, it's terrible. I'm never going to use it. And like getting that feeling out of people's head, understanding probability is next to impossible. And those are some of the big challenges. But there are others. Measuring how good a response is from unstructured data. Like, I don't think as a community we've really got that. Maybe we ever will. Right? Numbers are a lot easier to measure than how good my image is, how good this response is from the LLM.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I think we're all sort of feeling our way through it. And, when ChatGPT came out, in 2022, it sort of just flooded the world with this box where you could ask it any question you wanted. And so people started asking it questions. And I've seen this before, a lot of projects that we work on. You get to that 80% where you're like, this thing's really awesome. Then the cracks start to form. And then this isn't even particular to AI. It's really just about any new emerging technology.
Sure.
Right? Where people, the Gartner hype cycle, right? There's all this hype that's built up around it. But once it actually goes into practice, there's a lot of overinflated expectations and it goes into what they call the trough of disillusionment.
Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Talk about this. It's sad but true, honestly.
Yeah. But getting people grounded in like what the capabilities are and probably figuring out how they can use it differently. I mean, you see people that bash it, basically down, but I also see people potentially using ChatGPT as a Google search, right? And when I talk to people about like, that's not the same thing. They need to be educated enough on that it's really just predicting the next word, but they also need to understand like, what does that mean versus just typing in a question like you would expect Google to respond with, right?
Yeah. I love the analogy you drew there, right? Like you go back to like the 2000s when Google basically became a thing. And the bottom line is it just takes time for people, right? And like those, us that are really excited about it and want to learn more and really are pushing ourselves to get better and learn. But the standard person, I don't think is doing that, right? Like they're doing whatever is important to them, whether it's family or, I've been Google searching for years now. Like, why do I need to change? It's good enough for me. I mean, it's going to take slow adoption, but I really love you're pointing out of that parallel that this is sort of the next, I would say, generation in terms of ways to do your own research, right? Google's had that ability. Suddenly you got that information that became accessible. And now with the large language models, you have the ability to aggregate that at much higher speeds. Yeah, of course, we're still worried about the misinformation that exists. I mean, we're getting better, but we're always worried about that. Previously, we would have to spend a lot of time going through web pages, but now it completely, I want to know my new nutritional, schema. Like, what am I going to do to get healthier?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, okay, this can recommend some ideas for me and trigger some ideas in my own thought that are faster than me going through page after page of Google search and maybe reading the same thing and being like, okay, I've done that already. What else we got? So it's an exciting place to be. But I think the big thing is going to be time to absorb all this from a human population.
Gotcha. Yeah. So it's just going to take time for adoption to kind of work its way through and use the tool the right way.
Yeah, that said, forecasting is impossible, and half of what I'm going to say is wrong. Like I don't know what the future brings. I hate, in general, forecasting. We do our best we can, but then things like COVID happen, and you're like, okay, there goes all our models.
Yeah. Well, there's some quote, I think it's attributed to Bill Gates, but I don't know if he actually said it, where we basically kind of over-predict how far we're going to get in a short term and under-predict how far we're going to get in the long term, right? So we basically think that these things are just going to be completely transformative in the next 12 months. And we say, oh, ChatGPT 5 is going to completely blow everything out of the water. When it turns out that actually is becoming more incremental, right? I mean, I know that the first one came out and we saw some incremental things, but I think over time, it doesn't really going to move very quickly. Now, 10 years from now, we can't even imagine. Can't even imagine what that's going to look like.
I'm excited to see that Sora capabilities, this text to video, which is really just kind of just starting to see. I mean, you've seen obviously that stuff on OpenAI's Sora.
Yes.
The videos they create. I mean, it's truly amazing, right? Like seeing these things. With that said, you watch it the second time and then you start laughing out loud, right? With all the little details, like people becoming multiple people, walking on water. The camera pans and what once was a forest is now a big canyon. I mean, it's hilarious, but it's amazing.
Yeah,
and exciting to see. So I can't wait to see where that goes, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. Some of the things that I was thinking of here as you were talking. Well, so how do you think this is going to impact the future of work? Do you have any, as you're looking back at both within your organization or, I don't know if you have children or what have you, but yeah. So, I mean, what do you think the world looks like?
I saw you also have two kids. I got one of each, but I have two that I love. I mean, Yeah, we were actually, I was discussing this over lunch yesterday with a bunch of friends of mine. What is going to be it like for writing, right? On one hand, I'd say the eloquence of these large language models, particularly, the Anthropic or Gemini or GPT, they're very eloquent in what they write. Let's ignore what they're writing about, but the actual quality. And so what is that going to mean for us? Is that going to, when we have the visual, like it's a good example in terms of, oh, this is good writing. Like, this is great. So will that help me? From that perspective, yes. But now I have this laziness factor that I'm sure you've done it plenty of times. Like, oh, please rewrite this email for me. Like, I can't, or quickly I summarize this. Like, I need to do it, but I don't want to do it. Or this PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
And so the actual me writing, I think in some sense is going down less what I'm writing. So will that detract? So as this becomes more absorbed in the education system, are we going to get better writers on average, or are we going to get worse writers? My bet is worse, but like I said, I don't know.
Yeah, I could go both ways. Absolutely. I mean, I'm lucky in quotes in that, the classes that I teach are all technical and they're around machine learning and AI and IoT. And so, I don't really have term papers that the students need to write per se. I do actually say every week you need to find at least one article and get up in front of the class and present it, right? So they find an article related to AI and machine learning and get up and then, so they need to actually regurgitate it, right? Be able to basically speak it. And certainly they're using ChatGPT just to summarize the article. But there's still that human side of it where you need to actually be able to present. So
I love that.
And of course, most of the other, like the Capstone project is all code and all that sort of stuff. And of course, they're using ChatGPT to generate their code. But at the end of the day, they came up with the idea on their Capstone project on what they're going to do. And they actually need to get up and present. And they need to find all the hardware. The project is all about basically Internet of Things, getting data from the physical world, building a model around it. Typically, it's not an LLM, to be honest. It's basically, it could work on computer vision or sound or temperature, whatever it is, but build a model around that and then, apply it.
I love that approach.
Yeah.
I really, as a former educator, and going back to that communications I was saying at the beginning where you're basically saying, present this, right? Like that's so key to helping them become better communicators. And you're still using a hybrid approach, right? Like you said, they're using GPT or whatever LLM in the model to help them along, but they're starting with their own ideas. And that's, I think, the future of work, just like Google was, right? Like back in the 2000s, how did we do research? Before 2000, it was, okay, you go to the library, you look up a resource, you start reading, check your sources, write your citations. And now it's shifted to, I'm just going to go Google it and find that information. And now it'll shift to this other, the speed of creating things is going to be great. But there's obviously the negative things, and that we all worry about the maluse, or you don't have to worry about term papers, but you talked about, you have to worry about, I just Googled this topic. I'm going to write this term paper, go GPT. And just all the educator has is how many times did the thing use delve? And if you use it a lot, they probably...
Yeah. Well, that does make me think then, if these tools are generating the content that's going out on the internet, and now we're scraping the internet to make the next version of these tools, I feel like it's just going to continue to degenerate over time.
Maybe. I've heard this.
Worse. Yeah.
Yeah. And my boss feels the same way. I mean, and maybe that's true. But you also talked about this hybrid approach where we are interjecting our own thoughts and ideas that still might be there. But absolutely the circular loop in this degrade. But it's eloquent, so I don't know what that degrade is going to look like. I'm always excited about the future because I think any of our predictions aren't going to be right. Like they'll be in the area. But to actually see what happens, it'd be so neat to find out.
Yeah.
At least I hope it's neat to find out.
Well, it might be that writing without it is going to be the unique, cool thing 5 years from now. Like, I don't know if it'll be like retro, like, sure, all these other things. Now all of a sudden it's going to come back in style for people to start with a blank page and just start writing, right? So
I'm curious. So you asked that question to obviously people on the podcast, and what is their general sort of consensus about where we're going to be?
I would say all over the place. I mean, I would say a lot of people are scared, that basically AI is going to take my job. But I would say more often than not, people are optimistic that it should be used as a tool and that overall it's going to be a net positive for us. And I don't know if I can summarize the large language model size. It probably goes back and forth. But in general, I ask this question, what do you think about AI in the future of work, right? And I would say overall, most people are generally right now positive about it, that it's going to take away mundane tasks that we don't want to do anyways, that it's going to be a collaborator with us. It's going to help us get started, right? I mean, The moment I need to write a presentation or a speech, I do go to ChatGPT to give me an outline, right? Like, why not? And then I pick and choose, right? I don't take it all. I'm like, well, these are some interesting ideas. I'm going to ditch the rest, right? But why not start there, right? So yeah, you still need to be the subject matter expert. And like you were saying, like if you use ChatGPT to generate your term paper, you still need to do the research and make sure that it's actually right, though, I mean, it'll cite
Well,
incorrect
you
sources.
should.
You should. Yeah, yeah.
Whether I doubt that knowing some students whether that entirely always happens.
Sure. But they're setting themselves up. I mean, they're putting their name on it. Yeah. At the end of the day, if you're calling it your work, I don't care if you use ChatGPT or not. If you're calling it your work, the quality should be something that you can stand behind, right?
Yeah, I mean, the understanding that sometimes at 18 to 22-year-old that,
Yeah.
haven't completely understood that concept of what's mine.
I'm lucky in that, I'm dealing with master's students, graduate level. So a
That
little
is
different.
very nice.
Yeah.
They're a little bit more seasoned.
A little bit. Sometimes.
I mean, I'm still an idiot in lots of different ways. So
Yeah, for sure. So let's focus a little bit on people entering the field, right? So, you and I chatted a little bit about this before the podcast, but yeah, if I'm a young mathematician, let's say, coming out of school, for example, right?
All right.
So I just graduated and I'm curious about this AI thing so this is one thing that I will say, I don't think the schools, and my school included, a lot of the schools are really good about actually teaching the most latest and greatest things. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just universities have typically kind of been behind the curve, right? It takes a while. And so if I'm coming out of school right now with an undergraduate in math, I'm not sure if I've gotten exposed to large language models or LLM ops or all this type of stuff. Like, how do you think somebody should kind of at least start exploring this?
So I think you're right in some things that, the university almost can't, right? Honestly, if you go, and I'm going a little bit tangent, but I'll come back. The education here, we're moving at the speed of like light, it feels like, in terms of, and as a result, sometimes the quality of that research is, I read plenty of articles, like my morning coffee, I'm reading Medium articles and I'm reading and I'm like, okay, this is a good idea. However, your research is based off of like anecdotal or like 7 examples. And you're like, I think this is and you have the attention grabbing headline.
Sure.
So I understand potentially the universities play there that like they can't honestly keep up. And I understand that, and really for AI and LMs, it's going to be next to impossible. With that, in terms of getting to the field and drawing a little back, there are still grounding and fundamentals that I think are pivotal. And I worry a little bit, especially reading, the level of acceptance. We get press releases that this language model is doing so well on this data set and it's going to be the next best thing. And that's what a business does.
Yeah.
And I get that. But being able to parse that as a researcher and really a scientist, if you're going to be called a data scientist, in my opinion, you really have to be grounded and understand base statistics and basic data science, machine learning principles, right? Like I can't train on my test set, right? Like that's the simple one. And that's potentially all over these metrics. It's hard to tell because you don't know normally the training data for the LLMs. So grounding in fundamentals, even though it's not directly related, focusing on your communication, right? Like you were talking about that earlier in that capstone project, regardless of what you want to do in AI or even something else, your ability to communicate is just, in my opinion, so pivotal. Even if you're an individual contributor, not a manager, like in business, you still need to put your point out there. You still need to get people engaged in what you're talking about. And I look at every opportunity to improve my communication, right? We're required once a quarter to do a course on LinkedIn. I don't do AI. I do improved communication.
Nice.
That is always my course there. And in terms of actual learning, like I normally do like Coursera because those are more quickly to come out, or Udemy, or however you pronounce it, or one of the other platforms. And I often do picking and choosing where I'm like, okay, this is, I need to learn more about reinforcement learning. Let's just look at that piece of this module. And I don't end up finishing courses. Now I understand, that their platforms are built on getting certificates and there's still value in getting those certificates. But to me, the learning is the base core. So learn fundamentals, learn about the algorithms, do projects as well. Like when you get your first data science job, you should have projects. Even if you don't have any experience, you're just coming out of school, you're just trying to get your first data science ML job, like build a practical portfolio. I did 4 projects before I became a data scientist that were just, here's some ML projects, and here is why the business would care if it was a business use case.
Yeah.
And I'm selling that also to the hiring manager, right? Like my ability to sell, which goes back to that communication. So there's lots, but the venue in which you learn that can be lots of different ways, like courses. You can learn articles. If you can find mentors, that's fantastic. And what you want to learn, there's so much. I could go on forever, right? Like I want to get better at Bayesian statistics. And do I use it very often? No, but I'd like that tool better in my toolkit. So
that's
just
awesome.
scratching the surface in some sense.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, so let your heart sort of guide what you
a large
do.
Percentage. I mean, still get those fundamentals. Like you should know your statistics. I loved that when I was first learning out there, someone gave me a fun little thing that I think was totally fictitious, but a hospital administrator gets up and talks to the nursing staff and says, we're doing a great job here. 80% of the people that come in here are gone within 2 weeks. And the nurses are like, well, we know 95% of the hospital here, and they've been here well beyond that. And then the statistician goes up and like, yeah. And both of these things can be completely true, right? And understanding that immediately from a statistics point of view, I think is really, you should be there when you're in a data scientist role.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's this whole term around storytelling, right? Data storytelling is a thing.
Yep, but work on that. I strongly believe in that, given that change management is so hard at the end of the day.
There you go.
It's fun to work on all the technical stuff. I get that. We get really excited about, okay, I can make my algorithm better. Let's go search for better features, work on my metrics, understanding these metrics, building these pretty graphs. But you got to storytell. It is part of anybody's job.
Yeah.
Regardless, even outside of AI, like the better storytellers, the better career path I think you're going to have.
That's good. Yeah. And you sort of talk about, mentors and whatnot. Is there a good AI community in Atlanta? Do you know? I mean, are there people that come out and do conferences and stuff like that? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So we've had a couple of things historically. So there was for a while the Southeastern Data Science, and I don't know what's happened at that. I think that's pivoting to the conference that's going to be in the spring.
Okay.
I forget the name right off the hand. I'm going on this week to Collide AI, and I've never been to that one, so I'm excited about that. And there are meetups right now because we have like 50 people that I work with that are doing data science. A lot of the time I spend potentially with them. And like I said, my venue is Medium articles often in the morning. And then, I still have like my wife and 2 kids who like that's important. Work-life balance is a thing. And
absolutely.
So if I was single, I would probably explore more of that.
Yeah.
But it's only so much time in a day.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I think there is, and there are people like in Home Depot. There are people at Delta.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact. So yeah. But I could know more, honestly.
Yeah, sure. No, there's only 24 hours in a day for sure. And obviously,
I'm sure you understand that too, right?
Yeah. I was looking at your profile and you do this mundane to masterful thing, right? Which I think is fabulous that you're kind of showing people what's possible. And I actually just started this thing here called our AI Innovators Lab here at my company. And I basically open the doors and for 2 hours on Mondays and Wednesdays, we go through examples and we've been able to, it can be very time consuming being an educator or teacher to come up with stuff to do, right? And the last thing that I need to do is start offering free classes when I have enough other things going on. So we've been finding open source projects, right? GitHub's got a ton of great stuff. And so we're just working through some of these examples out there. So where do you get your material for some of the stuff that you're doing?
Where I can find it?
Yeah.
Honestly, right now, in 2 weeks, I need something. I have 2 other co-hosts right now, and I have something 4 weeks out, but the person said they couldn't do it 2 weeks out. So it's almost completely on the fly. And like you said, there's only 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
So I work inside the data science community. I work inside the senior management structure. So, and also product. So product is bringing on this Gen AI use case, come talk about it, right? Like from a business standpoint, why did you do it? How is it behaving? What did you care about? Things like that. And then you can also have the data science people that are working on it discuss the difficulties or the interesting things about that. We have a computer vision team, which are just truly amazing, who work in the subpart called Fusion of Cox Automotive. And I get some guy that comes on there and he comes and talks about the latest and greatest in Gen AI in vision space. One time I did a fun thing where I compared Midjourney with Google Image Creator. There was Facebook has theirs, and we have a version of Stable Diffusion up along with DALL-E 3. And basically, there was a prompt. They all created images, and then I sent out to the community at Cox Auto, essentially a Slack channel that's called #AI is the Slack channel. There's like 400 people part of it, and I say, please come and vote for the best answer on which model created the best image based off of the prompt. So a crowdsourcing thing, and then look at the results and then tell everyone, like, here are the results. Here are the best performers. Dolly 3, by the way, won back, and this was like 8 or 9 months ago. So like, who knows who would now, but there were still interesting things we got out of, like, and no surprise, I'm sure you're aware that in general, words and images aren't the greatest.
Yeah.
I think it's getting better, but if they say, like, please put this long word, say illumination or something like that, like, it might have one L,
Yes,
among other things. So lots of our ideas, and we have our friend, the LLM, to also ask us, like, I need some new ideas.
Yeah.
In fact, just this morning, I was doing that to try to come up with ideas. So, and then there's just time to create it, right? So if I'm going to do it myself, that's obviously more time than if I can find a speaker.
Yeah. Well, delegation, man. Yeah, if you can find other people within the company that want to do a specific thing. What's also fun is Hugging Face, just going in there. I think there's 600,000 models that they have built in there, and you can just experiment.
Crazy. Sure.
Yeah, you can just experiment and play around with not only their model data set as well.
And that's the only place, actually, if you ever go down to the embedding space, right? Like, how good is this embedder? The only place I look for currently is on the MTEB Hugging Face leaderboard. It's the only metrics like, when you're doing embedding, like, it's kind of hard to see, like, how well is the embedder doing, right? And so it's difficult to measure. And I remember talking a while back to one of the people at, he was at Zills, and it was saying, like, which is the company that owns, like, Milvis, which is, I think, is an embedder. I could be being a little bit getting my names wrong here, but the bottom line, I was like, you're in the, embedding space and RAG architecture space. What do you find is the most important? Because there's so many pieces when you're doing a RAG architecture. And he said, like, the embedder itself is probably the biggest thing, like switching out the embedders to see performance. Because I was like, what if I use a different metric? Like, I'm really excited. The mathematician in me is like, should I use cosine similarity? Should I use, Euclidean distance or a dot product, which are like the sort of the 3 under the hood things that you can use? And he's like, yeah, that's like the 15th thing I look at. I'm like, all right. So I went off a little tangent, but I do like Hugging Face is an incredible resource for a variety of things.
Yeah, for sure. Well, good. This has been good, David. How do people get a hold of you? Just find you on LinkedIn? Is that the main way?
LinkedIn or david.howard@coxautoinc.com to send me an email. I'm always excited to hear different things. Particularly, I had someone when I talked about this LLM Battle Royale, which you can Google and see, from which I gave twice, once at the AI4 conference and once with this GA Insight webcast.
Yeah.
And these sort of things where you're focused on different experiments that you're running that are in the research community, like, please reach out to me. If you run any of these, I'd love to hear from a research. Like, if you're coming to sell me, please be our company, like, I get 10,000 of these a day that are just, but if it's from an educative person, like, I want to hear about it.
Yeah. So. Awesome. We have liner notes in all of our stuff. So, when people are listening to the podcast, they can flip through not only the transcript, of course, but also I'll have a link off to your email address on LinkedIn for sure. So, well, awesome. Was there anything else, David? I always kind of try and give somebody the thing, be like, yeah, was there something else you want to talk about? I
mean, I would love to see, when people come on, what they're interested in. Like, what are the big things? I have 8 million different things that I'm interested, but, there's only much time. But if you crowdsource, what are the people most interested that have come on? Like, that I would really like to know about. Putting you on the spot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's two sides to it. Number one is the people that are on, the guests that are on, what are they interested in, right? And then there's the listeners. And I would say this podcast is actually from a nonprofit. So if you didn't know, we run a nonprofit. It's a 501c3 and it's called Applied AI, and it's broad-based. Basically, our whole focus is educating people on how AI is going to change their life. And it depends on not only business, but also personal aspects, just across the board, across industries, across expertise, what have you. So my goal in a lot of this stuff is to make sure that we touch on every little piece that we can, that no matter what you're doing, whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old, you're going to listen to this podcast and you're going to get something out. So
sweet.
My overall goal is just providing a platform to allow people to come on here to basically share what they know. Now, I will say probably most people fall under this, hey, this is how I'm using it at work, right? So you're probably a pretty good example of, somebody who's on, they're within a company, maybe they're a manager, maybe they're a developer, maybe they're in academia. I actually had a guy, the last one that just went live was a guy from the Ohio State University, right? So he had a PhD and all this stuff and has written 30 different papers and all this type of stuff. Awesome. Really, really good, but super deep, right? And so I would say that it kind of goes across the gamut with regards to the people that come on. But, most of the questions that I love to hear people answer is, how do you think it's going to change the future of work? how are you applying it within your organization or even your personal life, right? And people share various stories about how they're using it with their kids. I just recorded a podcast earlier today where I shared that, hey, my 12-year-old, we sit down with ChatGPT and I say, generate me a math problem, a math word problem for a 12-year-old. And it generates something for us. And then we collectively work on it, right? And not to say that he needs to do more math problems. He already has enough from school, but it actually generates good ones, right? Stuff that I wouldn't have thought about. And then it's a thing that we can work on together, right? So it's cool. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just looking for all sorts of little use cases, people that come on and they figure out where they're using it and sort of how it can make our life better and how it can change how we, I guess in some ways, how we live, right? You know, I really think it's going to have a huge impact on our lives going forward.
I agree too. I don't know exactly fully what that's going to look like, but I do think it's going to have a huge impact.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's things like, just imagine if you take some of this stuff to the extreme. I mean, what if you had something that was the whole idea around like an agent, you know, or a bot that's with you? What if it always listened and learned, like it was continuously learning based on words that you said, the way you interacted, pictures you took, all that type of stuff. And imagine if this person, this agent, you know, was with you until you're 80 years old, right? And then imagine if that person then, or that agent then could be passed down to the next generation, right? I mean, I just think back, like, yeah, I have some memories of my grandparents, right? And obviously there are certain times, but like, I can't go back and talk to him or her. Like my grandparents have passed away. And so I just think it's going to be interesting to see sort of how it's going to allow us to kind of live on in some ways.
I 100% agree with that. I mean, I've seen a device where we can keep those day-to-day tasks and potentially your conversations. Like from a reflection standpoint, that's going to be, I think, so cool. Like, oh, I talked to this person last week. What did we talk about? Like, I know it's on the tip of my tongue. And then like you could potentially bring it back and it'd be like, oh, wow, that's really that. Thank you. Because like I cannot remember everything with 100% accuracy, but I know that you have like the data's there. So therefore it can be pulled back.
Yeah.
But I did also see, it's a while back, but it was a Netflix thing. Was it called, was it Black Mirror?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Black Mirror.
If you want to have a negative view on AI, by the way, but it was interesting that there was that one episode where, you know, they have ocular implants and keeping an entire history of what's happened to you.
Right.
And the negative aspects of this, like once it's there forever. And I do worry about that. But for anybody that likes AI, I would say don't go watch that podcast. It's such it's a very, very depressing, but it's interesting and thought-provoking.
Awesome, man. Good stuff. I'll be sure to put a link off to Black Mirror.
Or don't. Like, I mean, if you want to be depressed, like, go watch it. If you don't want to be depressed on AI, don't go watch it.
Well, David, I appreciate the time today. Thanks again. And
that's been a ton of fun.
Yeah, look forward to talking to you again in the future.
You've listened to another episode of the Conversations on Applied AI podcast. We hope you are eager to learn more about applying artificial intelligence and deep learning within your organization. You can visit us at appliedai.mn to keep up to date on our events and connect with our amazing community. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Justin at appliedai.mn if you are interested in participating in a future episode. Thank you for listening.